We Hold These Truths by Lawrence Patton McDonald. Chapter 14, Equality of Voting. As with so much of our constitutional system, the electoral processes established by the Constitution have been severely distorted. The admirable Electoral College system for electing a president and vice president gave the people significant, though indirect, control over the process of choosing their highest officials. The system has been perverted by political parties, despite a warning about parties from George Washington and state legislation, but is still better than direct popular election could ever be. The harmful effects of the 17th Amendment, which changed the method of selecting U.S. senators, have already been discussed. 4 other constitutional amendments have damaged electoral processes in a subtle but dangerous way. The 15th Amendment, approved in 1870, prohibits state or federal abridgment of the right to vote because of race. The 19th Amendment, adopted in 1920, extends the same prohibition to sex. The 24th Amendment, ratified in 1964, prohibits poll taxes as voter qualifications for federal elections. The 26th Amendment, approved in 1971, prohibits abridgment of the right to vote because of age of any person 18 years old or older. All of these are cause amendments serving some political or sociological cause which had organized pressures and public support behind them, but they all were unnecessary. If sufficiently valid to animate authentic public support, the causes could have been served as fully and well at the state level without damaging the federal Constitution. Whether the causes were all good, all bad, or mixed, all 4 amendments, 15, 19, 24, and 26, damage the Constitution in the same way. They invade the right of states to set voter qualifications, the right which framers of the Constitution were earnestly determined to protect above all others. The 14th Amendment has been a disaster to electoral processes in America. On March 26, 1962, in Baker v. Carr, the Supreme Court assumed power under the 14th Amendment for federal courts to supervise actions of state legislatures in districting states for purposes of state and local elections. This abolished the inviolable constitutional right of states to arrange and manage their own elections without federal interference. On February 17, 1964, in Westbury v. Sanders, the Supreme Court assumed power under the 14th Amendment to proclaim the one-man, one-vote doctrine, equality of voting power, which enables federal courts to dictate the actions of state legislatures in districting their states for federal elections. The Constitution does not require or even mention dividing states into congressional districts. If done at all, it is a state function, subject only to such control as is given to Congress in Article 1, Section 4. The only legitimately useful purpose that congressional districting can serve is to make each district a compact geographical unit, thus providing maximum opportunity for voters to know the congressmen who represent them. The gerrymandering required or actually done by federal courts is worse than any ever undertaken by conniving politicians trying to draw voting districts to promote their own selfish ends. The weird results of districting for equality of voting look like sardonic caricatures of the American electoral process. A congressional district often travels great distances in length, ludicrously wiggling in and out along the way, reaching a minimum width that looks on a map like the waist of a wasp. Equality of voting with regard to congressional districts has been stretched by courts to force the same kind of absurdity upon voting districts for all kinds of election. Trying to draw boundary lines for equality of voting was so costly, disruptive, and impossible that many state and local jurisdictions moved too slowly to please federal courts. In some such cases, judicial activists hired their own election experts, drew up their own district maps, and ordered local officials to comply. 3 years after the Supreme Court's first legislative reapportionment edict to achieve equality of voting all over the country, Congress moved to achieve the same thing in selected portions of the nation. In August 1965, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This law suspended the use of literacy tests or similar voter qualification devices and authorized federal voting examiners to order the registration of blacks in states and counties in which voter activity had fallen below certain specified levels and to supervise the elections. This legislation brought the federal registration machinery to bear on 6 southern states: Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Virginia, and on all or part of 4 other states: Alaska, Arizona, Idaho, and North Carolina. In 1970, Congress extended the Voting Rights Act of 1965 for another 5 years and broadened its coverage. The 1970 Act outlawed literacy tests in all states, and it reduced state residence requirements for voting in presidential elections to 30 days. The system will continue to spread, with the Supreme Court presiding over it as the ultimate autocrat to give orders and make final decisions. But equality of voting, which is what all of this is for, will never be achieved under the system. No 2 states can ever have the same population, yet voters in the smallest state can elect as many U.S. senators as voters in the largest state. No 2 voting districts can ever be drawn to maintain even an approximate equality of voting. The logic of the Supreme Court's equality of voting dictum and of the Voting Rights Act leads to the inescapable conclusion that in the eyes of the Supreme Court, the Constitution is unconstitutional.